Okay.
got you. Hey, everybody, welcome in. It's another episode of A Nichols Worth. Tuning in live right here on a Monday night, like we're going to start doing here on a regular basis. And I'm joined over on that side. See, I got the points right this week. Over on that side by Jovan Alford. Welcome back to the program, to my frequent contributor and co host of this great program right here. Welcome, sir.
I'm glad to be back. Glad to be back. This time last week we were looking ahead to
Yeah.
the election, kind of giving like a brief overview and breakdown and kind of a preview of like certain topics and things like that. And now we are a week after the fact, and yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot of there's a lot of, like you said to me this week, a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking going on.
Oh, yeah.
Analysis. So yeah, but always glad to be on the Nicholsworth with you always.
For sure. Before we get going, first of all, thank you to all the people who are tuning in. This is a live show. This will be available, of course, after we're done recording. You guys can watch it as many times as you want. But while the program is going on, we highly encourage audience participation. You get bonus points, which will be awarded later for those that want to cash in on those. Bonus points for those that participate in the program. That means asking questions, leaving comments, and sharing the link to the show, either during the show or after the show. We don't mind. We'll take it all. So we are streaming live right now on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Instagram today. We're trying it out on Instagram. So if you're tuning in, especially on the IG, let us know that you're here. Leave a few comments, and we'll mention them and bring them up during the show. So we appreciate everyone's participation. And follow A Nichols Worth, the podcast, on Spotify right now. That is the best place to get it. Spotify. Jovan, a week of news this week. A week of news. That's one way to put it. Last Monday, as you mentioned, we were here sort of setting people up for the 2024 election, a quite consequential one, I guess you could say. In many ways. And the people have spoken. Donald Trump is set to be the 47th president of the United States, something that certainly, definitely surprised a lot of people, I guess you could say. For some people, I think it was the amount of which he won. He won by a large margin. This was not a close race, Joe.
No.
And I think that it sent a lot of messages about where we are as a country and the things that we are now going to get ourselves into in the next several years, maybe even next several decades, as the results of this presidential election kind of go down the line. There was a lot that happened. Let me get your overall view or your overall opinion on what you thought. What was your one major takeaway from this election here? Because there are definitely a million things we could break down, but what was your major takeaway from this week?
Major takeaway. That's so hard because between my own thoughts, you and I talking about it, extensively, even the night of, and then after the fact, then listening to a variety of, commentators, stuff on social media talking about it.
Yeah.
It's hard to kind of pinpoint what my one takeaway from it was. I think for me, the major takeaway is just like America, like, you get what you deserve type of thing. Like, the people spoke and this is what they wanted, and I think when we look at the exit polling data, I think there's a lot of, people that will shift blame towards certain groups. And I feel like you can't put blame towards people, black people, for how much that there was a lot of stuff put towards black people, more so not black women, because they knew that voting block was going to come out and do their thing, show up and show out that they did, that there was so much emphasis on black men vote, what the black men vote were going to do, what they were going to do, would they impact the race, would they show up, how are they going to vote for Trump, And then we saw that it wasn't even that electorate group that was the thing. It was Latino men and white women to a certain extent. So I think my big takeaway is like, hey, if this is what the country wants, then now you pay the consequences of whatever happens. And I know that sounds very grim, but they always say, right, that elections have consequences.
Yeah,
And I think we already knew what 4 years of a Trump administration was for the first time, and now we're going to see a very different, revamped administration. I feel so. That's probably like my
absolutely.
takeaway from it all.
Absolutely, absolutely. As I said, there's a million different analyses. Monday morning quarterbacking has been strong in this one. A lot of people tuning in and say, "Oh, it was this issue. It was Gaza. It was, the economy. It was white men. It was, white women. Different people pointing to different things like that as the singular issue. If you think that there was a singular issue or a singular point that decided this election, you might be a little off. I have the demographic breakdown on the screen right now for those watching us via video, and you can see the demographic breakdown. Obviously, white men only. Kamala Harris was able to capture only 38% of the vote of white men. Not
This is
entirely
this is this is
surprising
the
there.
this is the 2021. So that's the
I'm
2021.
sorry, this is Biden. I'm sorry that I have up
Yeah.
right now. So Biden rather was able to capture 38% of white men. Those numbers didn't exactly get any better for Kamala Harris in this election. Some of the other numbers that are up on the screen right now, white women might be, surprisingly, only 44% of white women Biden was able to capture. All those numbers, Latino men, Latino women, got worse. They got worse for Kamala Harris. It was kind of surprising to see, given the rhetoric during the course of the campaign, but that also says something a little bit about where we are. My biggest takeaway from this is that I think that Americans overall voted against the establishment candidate.
Hmm.
They voted against whatever was happening right now in America, they felt didn't need to continue to go on. And that's a
Yep.
trend that we were talking about before the show, Joe, that is happening in other countries as well post COVID, right? Like people forget that on top of a worldwide health emergency that we had there for a couple of years, that the economic impact after that was also going to be felt on a lot of these countries. And what we've seen in other countries is something similar to what we saw this week in the U.S. And that should be noted as well, that other groups are sort of following this same trend where whoever was in power post COVID, whoever was in power during or post COVID, is probably not very well liked by the people
Hmm.
right now. Those administrations are not very liked right now because they had to deal with essentially the economic mess following COVID. And I don't know, we'll talk about this and we'll break this down a little bit further. I don't know if the people necessarily understood that messaging, coming out of the Democrat camp as well. Americans chose change. They wanted
Yep.
something different, and that was my biggest takeaway from this election so far. I don't think that it was necessarily any singular one thing that Kamala Harris did or did not do, or the Democrats did or did not do, or that's something that Donald Trump did necessarily extremely well. So much as it is that I think that people are very sick of many of the options being presented, and they just want
Hmm.
something that's different. They just want something that's different.
Yeah, no, I think this was their way of saying that we want something that 50, yeah, half of the country, right? I think half of the country said this is what we want, something different, even though is it really different because we already seen it before, right? You know what I'm saying? Like
Right, right, right,
it's
right.
not different. It's different in the fact of, like you said, right? Anti-establishment, even though he's like establishment adjacent, like he's there, but
Pretty
it's like
much.
he for a lot of voters that you probably might read about in various stories, they believe that he can be that change, whether that be that change specifically for the economy, right? Because it seemed like that was like the biggest thing for people in this
Yeah.
election.
Yeah, the economy ended up being a huge deal. Again, we invite your comments and your questions in. What do you think happened in this? What does this election say about America right now? Get your comments in. and your questions as well, because I do think that this was a referendum election, as I mentioned before. For those that didn't necessarily follow all the numbers behind it, this election was not close.
Nope.
None of the swing states. I mean, any sort of metric that you can look at. Again, we're not going to break down all the numbers here because I'm sure you've heard them. And if not, you can look them up. The election was not close at all. And so that said to me that this was an intentional choice by America. They were not necessarily, they were definitely misled. Misinformation was a huge, huge part of this election. We talked about that in the pre-show as well. They were definitely misled, but Americans intentionally made this choice across the board. Latinos, women, even a somewhat larger share of the African American male vote, which didn't end up being significant at all, actually, in this election. But, you know, all of those groups were sort of degraded by this campaign or by Trump himself directly at some point and sometimes repeatedly throughout it. That didn't matter. They still chose that way.
Right.
So to me, this says a very interesting thing about America and where we are as Americans, that the details didn't really matter here. I think that a lot of people saw clips of Donald Trump. A lot of people witnessed these, you know, sort of clips. There was the week before the election, iMarquise, you know, he's a DJ that does those like remixes of funny things. He did the Cardi B coronavirus. Remember
Mm-hmm.
that? That was a big thing. He made a video about Trump, you know, or featuring Trump in the week before the election, and the way that that video was shared told me that Donald Trump was the popular candidate, despite the
Mm-hmm.
fact that he hadn't really done anything from a campaign standpoint, right?
No.
Like when it came to the political parties, the buttoned up political parties who have to have their ducks in a row and everything in an order, he didn't do anything according to the rule book and the way that things typically have gone. But if you combine that with the idea that people have generally gained a mistrust for what
Mm-hmm.
is currently going on, him going against what was currently going on actually ended up being a net positive for him, no matter what he was saying. And no matter how sort of egregious sometimes his commentary became on that level, he actually played into what the Americans wanted, which was not the establishment.
Yeah, no, he in a way he said what people felt, right? Like it wasn't like we talked about before the show when we put the show together, right? It wasn't rehearsed, right? It wasn't reading off of a teleprompter. Now, granted, he did read off a teleprompter, but people, his supporters feel like he says what it is. He says how he feels, he means what he says. He wants to, you know, he uses his catchphrases, right? He wants to make
Mm-hmm.
America great again. He wants to, with RFK, make America healthy again. Like, you know, he's able to, you know, reach those people, and his messaging is strong. And I think we saw that, like you said, even on the campaign trail, even the debate, and for his campaign, you know, and in his group, him not doing a second debate was a blessing in disguise, right? Because
Yeah, you better believe it. Yeah.
yeah, it helped him in the messaging that he was able to get across, even in some of the political ads, the same one they were just hammering on, in addition to what he was saying at his rallies. Like, it all worked out. It all worked out for him.
It all worked out in his favor. So for those, you know, because I've heard a lot of people this week saying, how could he say all of those things, and how could he do all of these things and all these, you know, 34 felony counts, and you know the list goes on and on and on. How could all of this happen yet still people confidently and strongly voted for him? Okay, that is, you know, the answer is tucked away right there, right there. I think
Right.
that's the main thing that people have to understand. They voted for this. They wanted this intentionally. Again, we're taking your comments in. Michelle comments in on the Instagram, which we're streaming live on Instagram, folks. By the way, if you're by a computer, or you know, it's a little bit easier for you to stream on Instagram. You're not by a computer, rather. Pull us up on Instagram. You know, check us out. Listen there. She says exactly when we're breaking down what exactly this election says about Americans. She said, American voted for change. I'm against the narrative that Kamala lost solely because she's black and or a woman. As a sole narrative, yes, I am against that as a sole narrative. However, it would be disingenuous for me to say that that played very little or no factor in what was
Mm-hmm.
going on, Jovan, because we've seen time and time and time again this narrative, how it kind of dilutes a little bit and sort of throws off a lot of the vote whenever there's a woman on the ticket. It just does all types of weird stuff, especially for men who can't seem
Mm-hmm.
to stomach this concept of what a woman leader looks like. I mean, you could talk to these these guys out on the street, and quite literally they're just perplexed by it.
Right.
And so I don't want to necessarily throw that completely away. But yes, you're
No.
right. As a soul narrative, I don't think that it was solely about just her identity.
Mm-mm.
But to your point, Jovan, that you made, I think a little bit earlier in the program, right here, is that Republicans were hammering home, or this might have been in the pre-show, but Republicans were hammering home this idea that Kamala Harris was not just not your candidate; she was inept, that she was stupid, that she was dumb, that she was a diversity hire. Essentially, that was a big part of the messaging at these rallies, to essentially hammer home ideas that had already kind of been solidified in the American voter, especially the American male voter, which is, I don't know if we could trust these women. They went and hammered that home even more by sort of incredulously, insulting her intelligence and things like that, things that didn't fit any sort of narrative at all.
Yeah, no, like you said, we can't say that was the sole narrative, right? And just say it was just that reason. No, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, her being a woman played a part in it. I mean, we saw with Hillary, right? Even though Hillary was, regardless of how you felt about it, right, was the way more qualified politician in even in that battle. But again, what did Trump represent in 2016?
Yeah.
Change from the establishment side of things. So we can't say that's the sole thing, the sole narrative. Obviously, it plays a part in it, right?
Yeah.
But when you mention her her being a woman, her being a black woman, the idea of inflation, right? And people can't afford eggs and they can't do these
Mm-hmm.
things, right?
Mm-hmm.
That starts to get the ball rolling when you kind of paint her as this border czar, and if
Yeah.
there's people that are strongly for immigration, right? When you paint her as that, like that also hits the nail and starts, you just keep on going at her, right? When you add the topic of um not also borders are, but when you run the ads of Kamala Harris is for they them and Donald Trump is for you, right? Like you start to build that case, right? And I think when you combine all those things, I think all those things played a part in it.
Absolutely. Let's bring up another comment. This is here from our YouTube page. Shout out to our YouTube listeners. 13 Down to Business podcast comments in and says 13 million registered voters did not vote. Interested how that would have been split if the numbers wasn't that high, if the numbers weren't that high. I would be interested in that too. However, I think that when you have you have a voting block that failed to come out, it's more of an indictment on the party of whom they failed to come out for,
Mm-hmm.
more so than the other side. Like, I don't think that Donald Trump was so bad that he was out here discouraging people from voting at all in an election that they otherwise would have voted for. But that 13 million, as you said, where were these folks at? 3.5 years ago on the program, Jovan, I brought this up about Kamala Harris. Shortly after the 2020 election, there was a concern about Kamala Harris's poll numbers. There was an article in The Hill, just a tiny article. No one thought really much of it. But her poll numbers were down. But Joe Biden had just been elected, and it didn't really seem like a whole lot of people were concerned about what Kamala Harris was doing. But this was a major key. If the
Mm-hmm.
Democrats went on the path that they were going on, Joe Biden would be 82 or 81 years old or so when he ran
Right.
for president in 2024. As I stated 3.5 years ago, this was an absolutely unsustainable strategy and plan from the Democrats. Absolutely unsustainable. They waited too long into the
Yep.
process, and then suddenly Kamala Harris rises to the top in this, and it was far too late. It was far too late to convince maybe some of those 13 million voters to that point
Mm-hmm.
that this administration really, that you had something to actually vote for in this administration instead of just voting against Donald Trump. The idea of voting against Donald Trump really had just worn away, I think, on a lot of voters,
Yep.
that they were just kind of tired of it. Like, all right, man, like, we get it. Like, and I think that a lot of people sort of fell into that category of, like, everyone seems bad. I know Donald Trump is bad, but the Democrats, they're not doing anything for me either.
Right.
What is,
Right.
what is Joe Biden up to? What is he doing? Nothing that seems to impact my life directly. And we'll get into that, actually, how that narrative is not true. But that's how people felt. I think that's the most important thing. It's sad to say these days, but you can't always go by the facts. Sometimes you just got to go by the feelings of the American people. And the American people felt like nothing was really happening for them in this election.
Yeah, no, they wasn't. And when you look at the numbers from this election, right, Trump had about 74 million, plus votes. And what did he have in 2020? 74 million, right? That did not change. His numbers did not change. Like the people that he brought out in 2020 was the same amount of people that came out in 2024. Like you said, the difference was, and as down to business, Tamar points out, there was a major difference. Kamala had 71 million, Biden had 81 million, right? There's a dramatic difference in that. And like you said, when you can't get your base home, well, not home, when you can't get your base to come out, there's a messaging issue, right? Like you said, you can't continue to keep running on anti-Trump and Trump's a fascist. Like mostly everybody knows that, right? Like on some type of level, he's a fascist, whatever, right? But what else are you bringing to the table? And
What
granted,
else? Yeah.
granted, in her rally, she did bring up certain things, right? She did bring up in her rallies and her debate, in her one debate that she had about economics. What is she going to do? Housing, children tax credit, like all these things, right? But for a lot of people, like you said, they probably were so worn out by just like, but that's not your overarching, message. And then, like you mentioned, when you only have 107 days to campaign, like you're really you're on a blitz. And I know people were saying, well, even when Biden left out, they should have did a primary, an open primary, open convention. There was no way possible that you would have been able to even find a potential candidate out of that in an open primary
3.5 months.
In 3.5 months. You would have been more in trouble. So part of the blame on that also, like you said, goes to Joe Biden. He said he was pretty much going to be a transition candidate, one term, but then decided, I'm still doing me. I'm going to try to do it. And there was cataclysmic effects that, now carry over in a domino.
I would agree with that. If you're listening live, don't forget, you can comment in on the show. We actually read your comments here and your questions here on the show live during the course of the podcast. We think that this is an important medium for people to talk two-way. We're giving our opinions up here. Certainly, we are far from the only ones in the world with opinions. And the more that we jump into the conversations, the more that we engage with these topics, the less that we're going to be caught with our pants down again in this country. Information is key, so please share this with somebody if you get a chance to do so. Shout out to our Instagram folks as well for joining in. We finally added Instagram to the live stream, so make sure you get up on that, which is, of course, the whole live stream, of course, today, sponsored by Parkour Athletic Apparel. Could you tell, Jovan, I'm kind of decked out today?
Yes, yes, you had the parkour stuff this week. Last week,
I fell short.
You didn't have
it on that one. But make sure you guys check out parkourtherapy.com. Can I get my banner up? There we go. Parkourtherapy.com for more if you guys want some gear like I'm wearing tonight on the show and others, a local business that I have supported from the very beginning because this business has supported us in every way. So we appreciate that. Parkourtherapy.com. Jovan Alford sits over there. I am your host, Keaton Nichols, as well. We are riding through this week of news, and the big news, of course, is that Donald Trump will be the next president of the United States. What does this all mean? There was somebody that was kind of smart one time that said, "It's the economy, stupid." It's the economy. The economy ended up being a huge deal. And I do want to stop and talk about this for a little bit. Here's some interesting numbers that I've thrown up on the screen. Let's see if I can read these. Which one of these 5 issues? This is an exit poll, Jovan. Am I looking at this correctly?
Yes, you are looking at it correctly.
Okay, so this is an exit poll from this most recent election, and you could see the third line item down. I don't know if my mouse is hovering over it here, but the economy. Republicans were favored in this category 80-20. Am I reading that correctly? 80 to 19% believed, or rather, Republicans believed that this was, their
top issue,
their top issue, if you will. Immigration was also another top issue. There you see 90%. The state of democracy, not so much for Republicans, right? So this message that Democrats, to your point earlier, you had mentioned Democrats are calling this man a fascist, is, dangerous to democracy and all of these other things. Republicans didn't really seem to care about that really
Exactly,
at
because it
all.
doesn't affect their pockets. Like,
Because who cares, right? As for the Democrats, this was the central message
mhm.
the entire time is that he is a threat to democracy. Never mind how you feel about us and our plans, but that guy is a threat to democracy, so we got to prevent him. This graphic sort of shows, in essence, what the American people actually cared about versus what the Democrats said that people should be caring about. None of that stuff worked. And
No,
this is important to note that none of that stuff worked. People felt like their wallets were squeezed here, and that was kind of the central action here behind this.
yeah, no, and like you said, it's the economy, stupid. Like, in the economy, that's what was on a lot of people's was on a lot of people's mind, in this election, right? And there was a quote that came out of the Philadelphia Inquirer. Forgot what the story was. Talking about Democrats kept calling Trump a fascist, but Pennsylvania voters thought that he could help them pay the bills, right? And there's a
Yeah.
interesting quote that comes from this story where they talked to this guy in Scranton, 45-year-old former construction worker, looked down at the poverty in the Rust Belt city and thought the nation needed a change in leadership. Wolfson said, this is the guy, Matt Wolfson, said he didn't love the dictatorial aspect of Trump's personality, but thought it could help keep the country out of wars and maybe bring peace to Ukraine. He's good and bad. People say he's a dictator. I believe him. I consider him Hitler, but I voted for the man. And there are a lot of people that, they thought, economically, even though he never presented a plan, of how he was going to make economics better. He never even down to healthcare, right? Because I think healthcare kind of goes into the story of economics, right?
Very much so.
He never presented a plan for economics, even though he was in office, 4 years prior, some years prior. He never presented a plan for economics for healthcare. He just said concepts of a plan, right? And I feel like that's for his economics. It's still concepts of a plan, but people, and like you saw and like we seen his exit poll, Republicans felt like, hey, like you said, we're getting squeezed at the gas pump. We're penny pinching. We got to steal from Peter to pay Paul. We got to, we can't gas. I can't buy eggs. Eggs now $4. Also, bread going up.
Yeah.
Like all these things where they felt like, this administration is, not helping us on inflation, even though inflation has gone down, right? Inflation has gone down, but it goes back to the greater point of, and across the world, like all these incumbent regimes, administrations, all are feeling the same pinch. And Republicans felt like, and as we saw in this poll, that they felt like he can help bring the country some change economically. What that is, we don't know. Only thing we know is tariffs, but I don't think tariffs, the way he's talking about them, has
I don't
more of a
even think
negative
that he
effect.
understands
You're right.
tariffs
It
at
has
this
a more of a
point.
negative effect.
And that I mean, it sounds like I'm being crass and that I'm kind of insulting and coming at this, and to an extent I am. But I think that the more important part is that again we have to come back to this core concept. We cannot forget that Americans chose this intentionally. We talked about this before the show, Joe, because Democrats, shorthand here for the Dems, but like Dems, man, they had this sort of idea that, we've actually been doing pretty good. But they were using terms and phrases that people can't readily identify, to use
Right.
a Cat Williams term, in possibly the greatest and funniest stand-up ever made. They're using terms that the American people can't readily identify. They're using terms like GDP. They're using terms like inflation. They're using they're using stock market ratings as a reference. They're using unemployment rates, and things like this. Inflation over time, how it's fallen or come off. Economic recovery numbers, right, since COVID.
Mm-hmm.
All of these were tools from the Democrats to say, hey guys, by the way, our our economy right now is stupendous.
Right.
Our economy is stupendous. Look at all the good things that are happening to our economy. And they used all of these phrases that I just mentioned to prove that the economy was good. That makes sense. It's a fact-based approach. And what Americans said is, I don't understand any of that stuff.
Right.
But Donald Trump says that the economy is bad, and I feel like it's bad. So therefore, I'm going to go with the person who has, to your point, no plans, no stats, no figures, no facts at all to support this notion that America is doing poorly right now, other than to say, hey, don't you feel like things are going poorly?
Hmm.
Exactly. Then things are
Right.
going poorly. And the
Right.
Democrats had no sort of opposing message to that
Hmm.
that the American people could understand. It's not as though Kamala Harris didn't try and explain to the people, hey, me and Joe Biden as a team here, we had to bend over backwards just to ensure that we are right where we are right now in this economy. I don't
Right.
think people either recognized or appreciated any of that at all. It really just came down to how people felt in this election. And right now, the cost of eggs, to your point, is too high. So they assume that the economy is in the tank. This has to be looked at, I think, at a deeper level for us to say, what exactly are Americans not getting? What exactly are Americans not understanding about their current economic status? Is it possible that a person could quite literally tell them to their face that water is not wet
That
as
the
they are
sky's
in
not
a
blue.
pool, that are in a pool of water as it currently stands? That was what was currently happening. Donald Trump convinced, what was it, 74 million, did you say, Joe?
Yeah, 74 million.
So
Yep.
let's just get this straight. And again, I promise you, I'm not insulting the intelligence of anyone that maybe voted for him, because it was your personal choice, and I commend you for at least getting up and voting. Okay. But Donald Trump convinced an entire group of people who were doing well economically that they were not doing well
Hmm.
economically. So the messaging in Donald Trump's camp, as disjointed, as racist, xenophobic, homophobic, transphobic, I mean, just as many phobics as you can throw in there, it
Right.
doesn't matter. His message that was totally untrue and unfounded ended
Right.
up landing better with the American people than the actual facts.
Hmm.
Americans ignored their own condition that they currently felt to listen to somebody else saying that they're worse off. That needs to be looked at. We need to understand that the American electorate maybe is not up to the task of handling big terms and big words like GDP and inflation and things like that. And that we maybe need to bring the messages, and I'm saying we not as a Democrat, but I'm talking about as pro democracy here. Folks need to maybe bring the messaging down here a little bit so that people can understand exactly the situation that we're in. Am I wrong about this, or do we need to keep a higher, sort of level of understanding how all this stuff works in order for it to be better?
No, you're not. You're not wrong. I think it goes to the point of you got to meet people where they're at. Said
Mm-hmm.
like that's how you got to you. That's how you got to approach. You got to meet. You got to meet people where they're at, and I think that's you know what Trump and his campaign they did. So that's what they did well. Their messaging was on point, right? They met people where they were at,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They, like you said, he told people that, like you said, the economy is bad, but guess who's going to fix it?
Me.
I'm going to
Yeah.
fix it. Like this country's in shambles. It's going into World War III, but guess who's going to fix it? I'm going to fix it, right? I'm going to fix all your problems. And I think the messaging even goes back to why you were talking about the messaging in economics, right? The first thing I thought about was the whole stimulus check thing, right? And
Mm-hmm.
how
Mm-hmm.
people for a good majority of people, like they were like, hey man, like we
Still
seen the
talking about
clips on
that check.
right, and we see the clips on social media and think people saying like, hey, I like Trump because he gave us a stimulus check, right? And it's like, well, like he put his name on it, but do you understand how it got to that point, right? Like the legislation that had to get passed for that check to come out that he
Come
didn't
on.
even want to give people because he wanted to have his name on it,
That's too
right?
much. That's too much already.
That's what
Like
I'm saying,
even
right?
you saying this right now, I can see people like losing, like drifting off and being like, "Whoa, wait a minute. There's process
Right.
to this stuff." So people don't just make top-down decisions as the president. Like this is the kind of thing. And again, I promise I'm not trying to insult the people that do not know, because this is why we are here. We want to convert people from I don't know to maybe you know a thing or two about what's going on, and it helps you pay attention to the details. The details are important here.
Mm-hmm.
So that is, I think, something that we have to look at. The results of this election told me that there are a number of people out there who do want change. I think that is genuine, and it
Yes.
comes from the soul or whatever else like that you want to say.
Yeah.
That is genuine, that they want change. How that change comes about maybe is a little murky at this point. To be
Yes.
fair to the American people,
Yes.
if you want change, this did not seem to be the big election in which change offered you a lot of juicy options here, if you will. I think that Donald Trump represents everything that Donald Trump represents, but Kamala Harris did not represent any form of change. And to our earlier commenter's point about 13 million people that allegedly stayed home in this particular election, if you don't think that there is a changed candidate that you, or if you're not interested in any of the changed candidates on the ballot, then you
Mm-hmm.
probably will assume, you will equate you not voting to you, or you voting rather, to you not voting as well. Like the effect would be exactly the same. Who cares, right?
Right.
If there's not a change candidate on here, then I'm for. I hate Donald Trump. I don't like anything that Kamala Harris is delivering either. As the Democrats, like, life hasn't gotten necessarily any better for me, so I'm just gonna stay home. Totally, I get that. I understand. I can't support that action, but I totally
Right.
understand it, and I get
Right.
that. So I think that there has to be a huge change agent that is going to be inflicted on both of these parties right now moving forward. Donald Trump is the popular candidate right now.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not he has plans, concepts of a plan, or otherwise, he is the popular candidate. If Democrats want to eat into that in the typical, political party ways, they've got to do some very, very radical work. Very,
Yes.
very radical work moving forward right now. We'll get into that here in just a second. Here, you can comment in if you would like. We're on Instagram. We're streaming live on Instagram. Appreciate the folks that are joining us over there. And you can check out this podcast after it is done. If you missed the first portion of it, or you want to share this after it's done, it'll be available on Spotify, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram as well. So appreciate the folks for tuning in. A monumental election here, one mostly on the issue of the economy and things like that. Moving forward, there is rather a Wall Street Journal article that was published just before the election, days before the election, that mentioned, or that whose headline said, the next president is taking on a remarkable economy, and a very good economy that is moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
So that is something to kind of
Which
bookend the
people,
conversation about the yeah.
which people also don't understand. Like that's what I
Yeah.
mean. Like Trump will be, when he comes in office 2025, he will be taking over a Biden Harris economy. Like the economy will be stacked for him to basically not blow it up. Right. When Biden came in 2020, he was taking over Trump economy and had to refix it, rebuild it back up because of, when you had the pandemic and things like that. Same thing when Trump took office in 2016. He was taking over an Obama Biden economy. Like these are just the things people just have to understand, and just think about it just for a second. Like these things happen for this reason, or this is happening, or this happened before this took place.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I know it does seem like we're asking a lot of folks to kind of research this a little deeper, but it's less research, Joe. And I think that what it really is being able to critically think about the things that are happening around us. I don't want to get super distracted on this, but we do have a tremendous amount of distractions in our lives. The way that we process content, the way that we look at the news and the things that are happening around us, happens in a lens right now that is not conducive to critical thinking. And so, we're going to talk about this now, about meeting people where they are, and what do we do to meet people where they are. But that is a critical thing. One thing that I learned as a communications major 800 years ago, whenever I went to Temple, shout out to the Owls, to you. But one of the things that was important in that communications degree is understanding that a message is not received just because you said something, right? Like me saying something to another person isn't a message until that other person receives the message. and is
Mm-hmm.
able and is able to interpret it back or respond back in some kind of way. A
Right.
message is not sent until the receiver receives the message, right? So we've got to get to a level where we are able to communicate messages. Just because we have facts, just because there are facts out there, unfortunately in today's society, simply facts existing and facts being the case is not good enough for the American people. And let me just say that again. Facts on their own are no longer good enough to survive on their own. There needs to be something deeper, and I'm not exactly sure what that looks like, but we'll be working on that over the next couple of years, hopefully to try and get ourselves a better understanding of this, because that killer concept of alternative facts that Kellyanne Conway brought up probably what now, 8 years ago,
Yeah.
to this point, 8 years ago, that Kellyanne Conway, the former Trump advisor during his first campaign, said, that's cool that you guys have facts. What we have is alternative facts. And
Yep.
this was a case full, I mean, this was an election full of alternative facts. The economy's doing great. Donald Trump says the economy is in the toilet. Okay. Migrants and temporary protected status immigrants are not eating dogs and cats. What did Donald Trump say? That they are eating dogs and cats.
That Kamala Harris is a border czar.
That Kamala
Meanwhile,
Harris was the border czar. Kamala Harris was never the border czar. Like there's all these things that there are just loads, Jovan, loads of facts and information for people to check out, and it's right here. Instead, what they did is they listened to all the alternative facts that
yeah,
existed on the other side. That is a problem. That is a huge problem that we have right now. Yeah, messaging needs to get better and all this other stuff, but we have a huge alternative facts problem in the United States right now, and that needs to be nipped in the bud. We are helping doing this show, things like this, that we're helping to hopefully bring people a better understanding as to what's going on. We're not trying to tell you how to vote, who to vote for, who to support, any of that other stuff. I could honestly care less. I know that sounds crazy, but I could care less. I have my opinions. You have your opinions. Do your thing. What I don't care for is people that don't have any knowledge or information
right.
on this subject, or they have the wrong knowledge or the wrong information on this subject, and they're going at it with the same veracity as others who are well informed. I think that being well informed helps you make the right decisions. Not telling
Yeah.
you who to vote for. I'm not saying that you should support this party or that party. We should support ourselves as a people. We should do the things that are common sense and that make sense as a people. And so hopefully these discussions will continue to help with that. But it is something that we cannot forget about as a part of this process right now. Right now at all. Let's get your comments in. As they are coming in, we will read them on the show. Don't forget, we're on Instagram, we're on YouTube, all that other good stuff. Down to business comments. It's a great discussion, fellas. I appreciate that. You could be the next one to get your comment read right here on the screen. Just let us know. I want to talk about what's next for these two political parties, or if maybe these political parties are potentially going to be off the menu soon, potentially. There's a term in basketball, you're very familiar with this, Jovan. It's called it's positionless basketball. That in today's society, for those that watch the NBA, that are engaged in that way, you know that basketball today doesn't exactly look like basketball did in the 80s and 90s, let's say, where there were more rigid positions. It's now
Right.
kind of like five guys on a court. You get the best five guys that are on the court that can help your team win. And that's what people go with. Do you have two centers? Do you have three guards? Do you have four wing players playing at the same time? Doesn't matter anymore in the NBA. A lot of people will argue. It doesn't really matter anymore. You kind of play a positionless game. Who cares? Giannis playing the 5-4. Who cares? I feel like we're headed towards that approach. This is my bold prediction for the week. I guess mark this down, right? But my bold prediction for this week that hopefully we can come back to in 3.5 years and say Keaton was right. That we are headed towards positionless politics.
Yep.
In a sense, that this election was a referendum on change. People wanted change. And Donald Trump is very much so not a traditional Republican at all. For those of you that kind of study this or don't study this kind of thing and don't understand usually what's on the right versus what's on the left, folks listening right now, Donald Trump is not a traditional Republican. He really represents very few things about the way that they do business. A lot of the same ideas and a lot of the things that he supports there, or that he's going to support, they agree with. But in terms of
Not to
how
this
he does
extent.
business, yeah,
Right.
this is very much so not your typical Republican. As for Kamala Harris and the Democrats, they ran about as tight and as accurate a campaign as you can for a political party on the left, including even moving over towards the center to include
Right.
some voters
Joe
on the right or
Republican.
voters in the middle, that those Republicans, yeah, that might maybe aren't super cool with what Donald Trump was doing, but still needed an option. So the Democrats honestly did all that perfectly. They did everything according to how they should do business,
Hmm.
exactly as they did business. However, nobody wanted that. They showed in this election that people don't like that.
No.
So the Democrats are going to have to move in a different direction as well. I would argue that the direction that the Democrats have to move in at this point is so drastic if they do it right. It's so drastic that the party will be left almost unrecognizable due to the kind of changes that they need to institute from here. But that's just my recommendation for what I think the Democrats should do. And the Republicans have already been taken over by this MAGA movement or whatever else is going on right
Hmm.
there, which seems to be a populist movement. The people
Yes.
actually like it. They
Hmm.
don't like what the buttoned up Republicans had to offer before that. That's why Trump became so popular and remains popular over the last 8 years. So we could possibly be headed towards something in the future that sort of changes the way that we do business according to elections, because these politicians at the end of the day, they want to win. They want to
Yep.
win, they want to win.
Hmm.
And Democrats will no longer employ any strategy that shows that they have been losing, which their current strategy shows that they've been losing.
Right. Today the George Bush, Ronald Reagan, Mitt Romney, Liz Cheney, Republican, likely will not
All
exist in
moderates. Yeah.
yeah, likely will not exist in the Republican Party in the next few years.
No.
It will not exist. It will just be you are in this new wing of MAGA, which is, you could say, and I think we might have said this in the pre-show, that the MAGA the evolution of the MAGA party was an offset of
Mm-hmm.
the Tea Party. You could make that,
Yeah.
make that kind of a consideration, right? I think with the Democratic Party, right, and I feel like some of the commentators stuff on social media and things like that have been talking and saying like, oh, with them losing, right, do they become do they because they see the country going right, do they make the pivot and say, well, you know, damn it, going instead of going progressive, like we're going to the right too. We're moving to the center. We're, pushing to try to get, to get those voters, right? Seeing how things, just completely went off the rails
Mm-hmm.
and, they lost. So I think I agree with you where I think that we could see more positionless politics, meaning for me, I think it's more of a way we could see people voting more single issue. Like, hey, if this candidate doesn't believe in this issue that I'm really, for and really standing against, I'm not voting for them.
Yeah.
I'm either going to protest vote or I'm going to vote for another candidate that may align with my stance on that, whether they be
Right.
Republican, independent, libertarian, green, whatever, right? Like I'm going to shift my, my politics, that way. I think like we said, for the future of the party, conversation we had last week, I think for both these parties, it's going to be very interesting to see how they go. Right? Obviously, Republican Party, you're in too deep now with the MAGA wave. Like you're there. There's no coming back from it. Nikki Haley, those Liz Cheney, Mitt Romney, our good old friend Paul Ryan. Like
Oh goodness, Paul
it
Ryan.
ain't
There's a throwback.
it ain't happening for you, right? And I think for the Democrat side, you have to figure out, do you still want to keep doing this, reaching over to to the other side,
It doesn't work.
going to the center, or do you go to the way of, we gotta lean toward more of these progressive, values that a AOC is pushing, or that a Bernie, Sanders is pushing, and really lean in and go on that direction to see what can happen. Now, if you take that route, are you okay with the consequences of, you might scare a lot of people off
Yeah.
from taking that route, even though we're not saying that's right or wrong, right? But just thinking how people are, and I'm not equating the two when I say this, how people were so like, oh my God, and appalled by the populism of the MAGA movement. Will they
Mm-hmm.
feel the same way about the progressive movement? Because there are people that believe, and I heard this on a radio interview earlier today where the guy was saying that Kamala Harris is the reason why people didn't vote for her, because she's leftist and progressive. And it's
Which
just
is
like, no,
crazy.
like, no,
Like,
dude, she's
no.
not. She's a moderate, she's centrist, like center left, like not in the same vein as a Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, AOC, Ayanna Presley, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, like
Ilhan
not even
Omar,
in
yeah,
that,
yeah.
not in
No,
that
none of
wing.
them.
So I think, like you said, I think we definitely going to see position of politics coming soon, because I don't think the Democratic Party will stay the same, and it will be very interesting to see what happens in the 2026 midterms. It will be also interesting to see who emerges, because now they will have a 4 year
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
with a new administration going out and another one coming in. There will now be that 2 to 4 year window of who is going to emerge as that new face of, hey, I'm throwing my hat in the ring to be a presidential candidate. I'm Gavin Newsom. I'm throwing my hat in the ring. Or
See, I
Josh
think that
Shapiro.
that's
Like,
so
there's a,
tired. I think that people are going to be tired of that. Like when
oh
we
yeah,
think
they will.
about
They will.
who the change candidates ideally would be, like what would it mean for an AOC or someone in that group that you had mentioned? I'm not going to name all those names, but someone within that group to rise to the top of the Democratic ticket. What would that really mean? I'll tell you, it doesn't mean the same thing as it did for Obama back in
No,
2008, who
no.
ran on the concept of what? Hope and
Hope
what?
and change.
Change in 2008. That was a plausible and believable story that this guy who is African American, who is well qualified, is going to approach 2008 version of America, economy collapsing, a war that was amazingly unpopular by 2008, and a Republican administration that had just been mired by September 11th and the response to it and
Right.
everything else like that afterward. Of course, it was easy for Barack Obama to step in and say, "Hey, I'm the candidate of change. Vote for me. I don't look like or sound like." Well, he kind of sounded like, but I didn't really look like any of these other people that
Mm-hmm.
are running for president are doing this at this scale at this time. It was easy. But now in 2024, can the Democrats come up with a candidate that has that sort of impact on the game at this point? Like, no.
I
Like, I
I
mean,
I mean, I
I
don't
mean, in my
think.
opinion, I don't
Yeah,
know how
no,
you feel.
yeah, no. I feel like right now, no, but I think that they're going to try to, like you said, it can't be the Gavin Newsoms, it can't be Shapiro, even though I think both of them are going to make that push for
Yeah.
it. I think it has to be AOC, right? I think some people have even theorized the idea of Wes Moore out of Maryland as
Mm-hmm.
that potential option in 2028, because we're going to be at a weird crossroads in 2028 where both sides are going to have to pick a new person.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
people forget, like, Trump, he can't run again. Like, he cannot run again. Like, this is his last run. So
Mm-hmm.
even on the Republican side, they're going to have to figure out who's going to be that new face, that new leadership, right? Is it going to be his vice president and JD Vance? Maybe we'll see, but it depends on how people feel. People could feel the same way how they felt about Biden Harris administration. Say, I don't know if I want, you know,
Yeah.
JD Vance taking over as as a potential candidate. So I think for both sides, I think they're going to have to. This is going to be a runway. Obviously, Vance, if he wants to take that step, he's going to have that runway.
Mm-hmm.
But both sides in 28 will have to decide who wants to be those new
Who's up
faces, right?
next? Who's
Right.
up
Who's up
next?
next? Like I said, will it be Shapiro? Will it be Newsom? Will it be Whitmer? Will it be AOC? Will it be Wes Moore? And Republican side, you don't know, right? Because I
Because
don't
who the
see
heck
them.
matters on the Republican
Right.
side other than
I'm.
Donald
I'm.
Trump?
It
I'm still
ain't.
trying
It
to
ain't.
figure out
It,
how they're going to
it,
get over that.
right. It ain't gonna be Tim Scott. It's not gonna be Byron Donalds.
Tim
Like,
Scott, yeah.
it could it be JD Vance potentially, but there's nobody else that you can point to right now and say that's the
That's the
next
one,
person.
yeah. That's the one. Got some comments in on the Facebook. Will Fowl comments in. He says, Josh Shapiro, Pennsylvania governor
Governor.
right now. I was going to say attorney general. He's a little bit higher than that. But Pennsylvania governor right now. This was one of those. We talked actually a lot about Josh Shapiro when Tim Walz was selected as VP for this particular run.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I said to you immediately was that if the Democrats are smart, maybe they're keeping Josh Shapiro out of this race, which is the riskier race, right? If he runs on the VP ticket now, it
And they
complicates
lose.
things, right? If
Right.
he will win or lose, it complicates Shapiro's political path moving forward, which I think that he has higher
Yeah.
aspirations as well. I think that he has his eye on the presidency as well. To that point, Will Fowl, thank you for bringing up Shapiro's name here. But I think that that was a strategic move to keep him off of this ticket because the Democrats maybe have some plans for him down the line. He's a really good speaker. He's already a governor of a major swing state that Democrats clearly need coming up in this election as well. So from a strategic perspective, I think that Josh Shapiro does look appealing in that way. But to that point, I think that overall, I don't think that there's anybody within the Democrat Party, although Shapiro and AOC and others have an enticing sort of case here. I don't think that
Right.
I don't think that you're moving the needle too much by elevating one of these individuals to the top of the ticket. I think the ticket itself, what it means to vote blue, vote Democrat, that in and of itself
Yeah.
has to change
The ideology has
first.
to change.
Yeah. Like I would be a lot more comfortable with the ideology if I'm a Democrat, which I am not. I'm a registered independent. But if I'm a Democrat, I'm thinking to myself, I've got to get this concept to change first, and then we can start talking about the name that appears at the top of the ticket. But
Right.
that's what you have these next 4 years for. They had the last 8 years, honestly, to work on this sort of concept, and I keep hammering this home. I don't know how many episodes of a Nichols worth I have to do before somebody picks up on the Democrat side and says, "Hey, maybe he's right here.
Messaging
Maybe
has
we
to be
do
better.
need to we need to represent something other than just being anti-Trump." Because you know what that did? That pushed a lot of people over to that
Yep.
side of things. There are a lot of Democratic or formerly safe Democrat votes that ended up on Trump's side of things because what did you do for the last 8 years? You talked about Trump. You talked
Right.
about what he's doing.
Instead of talking about your
promoting
accomplishments
something
and what
that
you
you
did.
have.
Yes.
Precisely. Now, I still would argue that a lot of that stuff would have gone over the average voter's head, but
Right.
you still have to make an attempt. The Democrats made no
Exactly.
attempt to make this race about themselves, and about the good things that they had done. That made everything about the potential threat that was coming in on the other side, and nobody bought it.
No.
Nobody bought it as a threat, even though he was quite literally telling on himself as a threat.
Right.
People didn't buy it. And again, we have to rectify that. We have to
Right.
rectify that. I'm not saying anything about any particular voters. I'm just
No.
saying we have to rectify that. Jake Sims comments in. He says, I feel like Dems, let me bring this up on the screen here so we can read it. I feel like Dems need to appear angry, like someone who will point out who is hurting them, and it's not the immigrants, but the billionaires. I do think that to some extent, the Democrats do like to point out who's hurting them, to that earlier comment. But I just don't know how effective that was. Excuse me. The idea that the Democrats had to promote this idea that like the country is actually doing well to combat against the idea that the other guy was saying that the country is doing poorly. So they were saying that the country is doing well, but we also, as a ticket, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz will represent change from whatever we're experiencing now. So the economy is good, but we're also going to change it. Was also in a weird, bizarro world what Donald Trump tried to sort of do the opposite of. He tried to convince you that the country is bad now, but it's going to be good because he's coming in, not from anything that the Democrats did. So a lot of mixed messaging here. And I think that ultimately, while the Democrats did do a pretty decent job of pointing out who the bad guy was in this particular case, they didn't do a good enough job of pointing out who the good guy was. Or they didn't do a good enough job pointing to a relevant good guy that was not named 82-year-old Joe Biden. 81, I'm sorry, whatever, year old Joe Biden. So, to the first part of your comment, though, appearing angry, I wanted to ask you about this, Jovan. Do you think that the Democrats would be better off with a candidate that almost sort of did the same thing that Trump did on the Republican side of things, but kind of come in and blow everything up and say, hey, I'm against everything that the Democrats are doing here, but I appeal to a lot of Democratic voters here. Is there somebody out there, or can the Democrats sort of turn the page to appear like they are now the anti-establishment candidate? Or I mean,
when I
anti-establishment party.
when I think about the idea of about the Democrats will need to appear angry, I think that all comes down to approach and how you speak and what are you saying in your messaging, right?
Yeah.
Like I think that's what going to our early comment from Will talking about Josh Shapiro. I think that's why a lot of people gravitated towards him because every time you heard him speak, it was like this guy's speaking with emotion. He's speaking
Yeah.
with like he appears angry, right? Like
Yeah, he's
and
getting the
wanting to
people
like
going,
yeah,
right?
he's getting people going. He's getting people like and even Bernie Sanders, right? Bernie Sanders, and even when he was throwing his hat in the ring, right? He was bringing that same like
That
punch,
fire.
fire,
Yeah.
like and bringing that fire, and even bringing it to the point of putting out the billionaire. Same thing with Elizabeth Warren, right? Bringing that energy and calling out the billionaires, right? So I think to appear angry part, you don't need to go like Trump level because like that's just like you're just going down like a significant rabbit hole and you're like touching things that you shouldn't even want to touch because
Yeah.
you will not get graded on the same curve that he got graded on. Like you
Correct.
will be everything under the deep blue sea on CNN, MSNBC, whatever, saying like, "Oh my God, I can't believe such and such said this." Meanwhile, him is just like, "Hey, it is what it is. It's him." So I
Yeah.
think I think the appear angry part. I think it comes down to approach. It comes down to
Hmm.
what you're saying and how you're saying it. Like if you're like I said, that's why people like Shapiro. When he was doing TV stuff and when he was obviously stump campaigning. I think when he did it when Harris, I think one of her first things was in Philadelphia and he spoke
It
and you
was.
just
Yeah.
saw people just getting like this dude is like going off like but people was liking it like because he was bringing that fire that like he's like speaking to I think to the casual viewer be like this guy's speaking from the heart like he's really like telling us what we need to hear. So I think
Yeah.
it all like I said comes down to approaching just what you're saying.
Let's talk a little bit of third party and alternate party here as we close here. I appreciate all the comments from people. Will added into his comment. He said, I think him talking about Shapiro and Andrew Yang as vice president would be one way I'd vote left again. That's an interesting one because Yang kind of on the left outside of the party. I don't know, something like that is where Andrew Yang finds himself in that. And I would say that if Josh Shapiro were to make himself appealing to, part of that 13 million that we talked about that stayed at home, and potentially Democrats or those that are on the left that want something more exciting to vote for, something like that kind of change, I could see that being, sort of the aggressive, sort of change. Now, Andrew Yang, I don't know if I really have much of an opinion on him. He's not really a politician, but that is kind of the significant portion of this.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a non politician, or is at least somebody that represents the non politician ticket, that could step forward and say to the people, look, these political parties, both in their own ways, have failed us, in a big way, that we need to elevate a candidate for the people, of the people, whatever. Donald Trump
Mm-hmm.
is not that candidate. This is just my opinion. I'm going back into opinion mode here. Donald Trump is not that person, although he did represent that change. So I
Right.
understand why people voted for him from that perspective. And I understand that now people are going to be very disappointed at many of the things that they thought were going to happen under a Trump presidency
Mm-hmm.
simply because he represented change. But that
Yes.
is their problem to deal with. That is their surprise that will pop up out of the box here in the next couple of years. But in terms of everyone else, I think that there are people that need something to feel in this
Mm-hmm.
election. If there's any silver lining from this election, it's the idea that people have voted to sort of break up the big banks of politics,
Yeah.
break up the big parties of politics, and sort of get a fresher approach. And if the Democrats don't understand this and don't see this now at this point, Jovan, I swear I'm going to flip a whole elephant right here because it is absolutely ridiculous to not be able to see the shift, the winds, and the shifts of change that are happening in politics right now. It's young people, it's men, it's women, it's Latinos, it's all these groups that the Democrats formally have opened up their arms and said, hey, welcome in, we'll take everybody, come on in, we're good for
Mm-hmm.
everybody. Don't work like that anymore. You got to do something new and something extreme. And I don't know. I mean, I hate to fall into that same sort of political category, but you got to again meet the people where they are.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
simply you got to give them something that they're going to appeal to as well. And that could be difficult. Jake says that's exactly what I was getting at, guys. Show some emotion like Shapiro and Sanders. There was a Bernie Sanders did have a comment after the election. I don't know if I don't think we clipped that, so we can't throw it on the screen. But Bernie Sanders did have some interesting commentary after the election, a criticism for the Democrat Party and things like that. Afterwards, it kind of seemed like it might maybe fell at a weird time, as we were all kind of trying to analyze what exactly was happening with this election. But I do think that no matter what the approach is, that people want something different. That's something that we're going to continue to talk about here on this show
Hmm.
in the coming weeks as well. This is not a pro Democrat or an anti Republican show or a pro third party or anything else like that. I don't care about which party is which. I don't care who you voted for. Again, I
Yep.
don't. But the bigger discussion is how can we build from this? Because whether or not you voted for or against this or that, there are some realities that are about to become super real in this
Yeah.
country in the next
Yeah.
couple of years. And we need to be prepared for that by paying attention to what's happening. If we pay attention, these questions that we're asking about who's up next, who do we trust, who's going to lead this discussion in the next couple of years are going to become crystal clear. You know,
Hmm.
we're going to become a more informed electorate
Yep.
to be able to sift through these sort of issues on our own, not letting the political parties sort of determine what choices that we have, but taking the power back as the people. While this first step towards this might have seemed like a step in the wrong direction, I personally believe it was a step in the wrong direction. I do think that people opting for change and opting for something different is something that we can work with. This is something that we can work with. And yes, there's going to be some Trump supporters. I know there's a lot of people who kind of lean left that listen to this program. There's going to be a lot of Trump supporters in your friend base, in your family, and people that you work with. Things like that are especially going to start rising to the top now that Trump has won the
Hmm.
election. They're going to be very loud and very
And very
proud
vocal.
and
Hmm.
very vocal about what they're going to be doing in the next couple of years, Jovan. So I don't know if caution's the right word, but I would advise people to stay focused on what you want to see, the change that
Hmm.
you want to see in this country. People have voted for change, people want change, so change is going to come, and it might be a little rough, in
Yep.
these next couple of years because we we elected a president who has very little idea what he's doing, and that is the nicest way that I could put it. Coming up. But as this administration forms, we need to be forming ideas as to how to make it better. And we need to stop. If I can close on this, Jovan,
Yeah.
we need to stop focusing in on what the hell Donald Trump is doing all the time. It is not about
Yep.
him. It is not about an
Or what he's
individual
tweeting
or
or
what
what he's
he's
putting
tweeting,
on
all
Truth
this stuff.
Social.
Please, please do yourselves a favor. And this goes to I'm not just speaking about the individuals here. I'm talking about left wing media, independent media. I'm talking about the CNNs of the world, the MSNBCs of the world, the Fox Newses of the world that are obsessed with the idea that this person who is now atop the American political world is not
Again.
doing anything political. He's not doing
Hmm.
anything by the rules. He's breaking all the rules. Okay, we get it. It's over with. Okay, that's a part of the show, and I don't want people to be led astray by the show, whether it's Democrats, Republicans,
Hmm.
MAGA, or progressives. I don't want anyone to be distracted by the show. There's real
Yep.
things, real initiatives on this ballot. We didn't even talk about abortion tonight, Joe, and the failed ballot measures in Florida and other states as well, which sort of reinforce this idea that again people aren't willing to sort of come together as a group. People aren't willing to step outside of their own demographic group to try and help protect people of other demographic groups. We don't have that going on in the country right now, and that is a major problem as well. So as we move forward here, we just know that we all want change. The change that we voted for was not necessarily great change, but we can continue to build on that. Whether you're a Trump supporter or whether you're a person that believes in the pro democracy side of things, we got some more work to do moving forward on this. And please stop talking about Trump all the time.
Yes, don't. Yeah, and I think to wrap, I agree with you. Right, I think it's up to, the the news stations, like you said, CNN's, the MSNBC's, Fox News going to do what they're going to do, OAN's going to do what they're going to do. It is what it is, right?
Sure.
But CNN, MSNBC, NBC, CBS, ABC, like you said, the political shows, on YouTube, independent media, left wing, stuff like that. Like, don't give so much credence to, like you said, what he's doing. We already know what it is. Like, we already know what it's hitting for. We already know his tricks out the bag, right? We already know he's gonna say some wild stuff on Twitter. He's gonna say some wild stuff on True Social, right? Look at who he's bringing into an administration. Look at who he's putting in power, right? For someone that criticized and ran a whole campaign on Kamala Harris being a border czar, he hired someone who he self-appointed as a border czar, who wants to do wild stuff. Like, let's put the focus on that, because that's how we inform people. We don't inform people by saying, "Oh my God, did you see what he just said on True Social?"
Did you see what this said? Yeah. Did you see the latest Trump video? It's
Right.
it's really doing a disservice. And again, to the way that we process media, the way that we process information is oftentimes on our phones, and oftentimes in like 30 or 60-second, bits that we see on social media and other places as well. I understand that we have to meet people where they are, but that is not the whole world, folks. That is not the whole world. And I think that the more that whoever this next political movement is, whether it's Democrats or some other party, or just maybe a movement of people that just decide that this is a different direction that they want to go. Either way, it has to be a promotion of the good things instead of a constant criticism of the bad things. It's so easy to criticize somebody. It is so easy to criticize somebody, to throw eggs, to try and down somebody, to talk negatively about somebody. It is difficult to promote the idea that you are a good and motivating force for change. It is difficult work, as Kamala said oftentimes during the course of the campaign. It didn't really work, but it's still a good message. It's hard work, but it's good work. Okay, like we don't need to be moving away from this concept or this idea that there's work to do. And I believe that people are primed and ready for it. Even the people that voted for Trump, that maybe are not huge fans of his, but they just wanted change. I think that's the most, that this is who we're talking. We're talking to you guys right now during the course of this. Because now's the time to make and inflict that change. As you said, Jovan, Trump's not going to be here after 4 years, no matter what. So we do need to start looking at what this country is going to look like in the next steps. Moving forward. Absolutely. All right, we're going to wrap it right there, guys. A great Monday show. Thank you for everybody that tuned in as well. This episode will be available on podcast as soon as I can figure out how to upload it there without an error happening on my computer, guys. I appreciate everyone tuning in, though, for the live show. This will be available for view on YouTube, on Facebook, and on Instagram as well. We'll be back next Monday at 8, barring anything crazy that happens. That's Jovan Alfred as well. If you want to tell folks how they can reach you, or anything else that you would like to promote at this point, sir.
That's a good question. I do not know, because I might be going to blue sky. I do not know. So we'll figure that all out. Figure that out.
Maybe exciting changes coming in the future. One thing that we know that he's been a contributor to a Nicholsworth or the Lounge, whatever brand supporting. Of Nichols media that you want to consider.
Keep on supporting, keep on listening. I guess that's my message. Keep on listening, keep on supporting, keep on subscribing. Download the pod, share it with people.
Please do.
Just share to people, just as we, as we all try to figure out and navigate, these next 4 years.
We're just trying to figure it out. That's all. We're just trying to figure it out. Shout out to Parkour Therapy. Parkour. You can see it on me. Hold on. I got to bring down the ad so you guys can see the shirt. I got the Parkour. There it is. I got the Parkour long sleeve on right now with the Parkour knit cap. I know the knit caps are available at the long sleeves. I'm not sure, but you got to check out parkourtherapy.com. Because winter is coming, folks. For my Game of Thrones fans, check out parkourtherapy.com. You can rock the same gear that I'm rocking here on the show and support a local business that supports open conversation, that supports democracy, that supports a positive change moving forward as well. Parkour. We appreciate the folks over at Parkour. Go to parkourtherapy.com right now. We'll see you guys next Monday for a fresh episode of A Nicholsworth. Until then, peace.